Welcome to the College Investor Audio Show, where we talk about the biggest issues impacting millennial money, from student loan debt to side hustles to building wealth. We will show you how to get out of debt so that you can build real wealth for the future.
Welcome to the show. We are so glad you're here today as we discuss, will the student loan pause and interest waiver be extended again? Let's get right to it. All right, so the student loan pause is currently set to expire December 31st, 2022, and repayment is going to restart, January 2023. But pending lawsuits may delay implementation of the president's student loan forgiveness plan. Will this cause the student loan payment pause and interest waiver to be extended again for an 8th time while the lawsuits are still pending? Okay, so here's a breakdown of some of the outstanding issues right now. See if we can dive into this without getting too complicated. Okay, so some of the outstanding lawsuits against Biden's student loan forgiveness program. There are 6 plaintiffs that have filed lawsuits against the Biden administration, seeking to block the president's student loan forgiveness plan. But before these cases can be considered on the merits, the plaintiffs must establish that they have legal standing to file the lawsuits. To establish legal standing, the plaintiffs must demonstrate that they are or will be harmed by the president's plan. This demonstration must be direct and definite, not speculative and tenuous. If any of these cases can be considered on the merits, they are more likely than not to demonstrate that the president lacks the legal authority to establish a new, broad student loan forgiveness program without explicit authorization by Congress. However, demonstrating that they have legal standing to bring the lawsuits is a significant and perhaps maybe insurmountable barrier. Okay, so right now let's take a look at the status of these lawsuits. A total of 6 have been filed, as we mentioned, against the president. 2 lawsuits have been blocked because of a lack of legal standing. These lawsuits were dismissed upon appeal, and the U.S. Supreme Court let the lower court's dismissal stand. A 3rd lawsuit was also blocked because of a lack of legal standing. However, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals granted a preliminary injunction against the president's plan while the court considers the appeal. The U.S. Department of Education has appealed the temporary injunction to the U.S. Supreme Court. A 4th lawsuit ruled that the plaintiffs have legal standing and decided the case on the merits, finding that the president's plan is unconstitutional and vacating the program. This case has been appealed by the U.S. Department of Education to the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals. 2 additional cases are still pending. Are you still with me? Thus, one lawsuit has temporarily suspended the president's plan, and the other has terminated the program. Both of these lawsuits are being appealed. So depending on how long the appeals process takes, and we know how fast these can go, the president's plan may be delayed beyond December 31st, 2022, raising the possibility of an additional extension to the payment pause and interest waiver. Litigation timeline. On August 24th, 2022, President Biden announced his broad student loan forgiveness plan and a final student loan pause extension. On September 27th, 2022, the Pacific Legal Foundation was the first to file a lawsuit against the president's student loan forgiveness plan. They were also the first case to be dismissed. On September 29th, due to a lack of legal standing. That was fast. After the U.S. Department of Education clarified that borrowers can choose to opt out of the president's plan. They ultimately filed an emergency application to the U.S. Supreme Court, which declined to hear the case on November 4th, 2022. So the status of this one? Dismissed. On September 29th, 6 state attorneys general, Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, and South Carolina, filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Missouri, Eastern Division, to block the president's plan. All right, so these states hold or service loans in the Federal Family Education Loan Program, FFELP, and would lose revenue if borrowers could consolidate their FFELP loans into the direct loan program to qualify for forgiveness. The U.S. Department of Education responded by limiting FFELP borrower eligibility for forgiveness to just those borrowers who applied for a federal direct consolidation loan before September 29, 2022, undermining the state's claims to legal standing. The court dismissed the lawsuit October 20th, 2022, because the states lacked legal standing to bring the suit. Status: dismissed, although there is an appeal pending on this. On September 29th, 2022, the Arizona Attorney General filed a lawsuit to block the president's loan forgiveness program, arguing that it interferes with the effectiveness of public service loan forgiveness as a recruiting and retention tool. This case is still pending. October 4th, 2022, the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty filed a lawsuit against the president's plan on behalf of the Brown County Taxpayers Association. The case was dismissed October 6th due to a lack of legal standing. They filed an emergency application to the U.S. Supreme Court, which also declined to hear the case on October 20th, 2022. You will not be tested on all of these dates, by the way, but on October 10th, 2022, the Job Creators Network filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas to block the president's plan. The plaintiffs included a borrower whose FFELP loans do not qualify for forgiveness and a borrower who did not qualify for $20,000 in student loan forgiveness because they didn't receive a federal Pell Grant in college. The lawsuit argues that the U.S. Department of Education violated the notice and comment provisions of the Administrative Procedures Act, APA, even though the HEROES Act of 2003 waives those provisions. The court ruled on November 10th that the program violates the U.S. Constitution, and the court vacated the program. Now, the status of this one: it's in favor of the plaintiffs, the only suit that is, and the appeal is also pending on this. The U.S. Department of Education launched a beta version of the student loan forgiveness application on October 14th and the full application on October 17th, 2022. All right, the next quick lawsuit we'll cover and then we'll move on. October 18th, 2022. The Cato Institute filed a lawsuit to block the president's student loan forgiveness plan, arguing that it interferes with the effectiveness of public service loan forgiveness as a recruiting and retention tool. This is the only lawsuit to have been filed after the president's plan was fully ripe, so to speak. It is similar to the lawsuit by the Arizona Attorney General. And the status of this one? Still pending. Let's move on to a little bit closer to where we are right now. On November 18th, 2022, the U.S. Department of Education appealed the preliminary injunction in the 6 state attorneys general lawsuit to the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of other steps that went into this process, but as you can see, the existing litigation has already delayed implementation of Biden's loan forgiveness plan by at least 2 months since the first lawsuit was filed, and it could be surmised that both the current litigation and future lawsuits may delay things a little bit further. So, all this to say, will the student loan pause be extended further? Of course, there are multiple factors that make it appear that the student loan payment pause is going to be extended again. First, the lawsuits from the 6 state attorneys general and Job Creators Network have put the president's loan forgiveness plan on hold, pending the results of the U.S. Department of Education's appeals. Appeals can take 6 months on average, typically requiring 30 days for filing by the plaintiff, 30 days for a response by the defendant, 21 days for a rebuttal, and so on and so forth. That alone might delay rulings on the appeals until sometime in 2023. However, the judges have been pursuing these cases expeditiously, opening up the possibility that they may be resolved before the end of the year. Don't hold your breath. If the cases are still pending at the end of the year, the Biden administration is likely to further extend the payment pause and interest waiver for an 8th time. If the Biden administration loses their appeal, they might choose to extend the payment pause and interest waiver for the duration of the president's tenure in office as an alternative to forgiveness. Second, the president recently extended the COVID-19 state of emergency through January 11th, 2023. The Biden administration relies on the HEROES Act of 2003 to extend the payment pause and interest waiver so long as the National Emergency Declaration is still in effect. On September 18th, 2022, President Biden told 60 Minutes, "The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it, but the pandemic is over." But the president has not rescinded the national emergency declaration, so it's still in effect. A shifting of the status of COVID-19 from pandemic to endemic doesn't necessarily mean that the national emergency is over. The national emergency declaration has been renewed every 90 days since March 2020. However, on November 15th, 2022, the U.S. Senate passed a joint resolution to end the national emergency declaration by a vote of 62 to 36, with 2 senators not voting. The U.S. House of Representatives has not yet voted on the joint resolution, although only a simple majority is needed to pass the joint resolution. The president can veto the joint resolution, in which case a 2/3 majority will be required to override the veto. Finally, the U.S. Department of Education could also use this time to issue new regulations for income contingent repayment to transform it into a means-tested student loan forgiveness plan. The final rule would have to be published in the Federal Register by November 1st of 2023 for the regulations to go into effect July 1st, 2024. The Biden administration could continue the payment pause and interest waiver until those new regulations become effective. Okay, so we're all asking this question. When can we expect to see an announcement about this payment pause extension? If the Biden administration does implement an 8th extension to the payment pause and interest waiver, they are likely to announce the extension at the last minute to underscore the potential harm to borrowers from a failure to decide the cases in their favor. Consider also that the 7th extension was announced only 7 days before the payment pause and interest waiver was set to expire. So if the U.S. Department of Education implements an 8th extension to this pause and interest waiver, it will be the federal agency that has cried wolf twice. The 5th and 7th extensions were both identified as the final extension. Will borrowers believe them when they really start repayment of federal student loans? That remains to be seen. On the other hand, the president's student loan forgiveness plan may have solved one problem with the restart of repayment. As many as 1/3 of borrowers may have moved during the pandemic, increasing the likelihood of delinquency when repayment restarts. However, the student loan forgiveness application collected current telephone numbers and email addresses from more than 26 million borrowers. This could help making restarting payments much less risky in terms of contacting borrowers to ensure they don't fall into delinquency or default.